Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
Animals are great. I think my favorite animal of all the animals has to be the earthworm. so good, so accurately named. Although I don't know any worms from any other planet. But that one from this planet. From the Earth. That's our worm. It's representing the whole planet. Because all the other animals are quite unclear about their home planet. Like, where are you? I'm a cow. Yeah, but which planet? But with the earthworm, we know immediately. From around here. Local animal. I'm a sunflower. Well, that's bullshit.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Apollo Wednesday, October the 8th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and Apollo. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Day 8 of the shutdown, and we have these developments. President Trump puts the blame firmly on the Democrats, and he says if it goes on much longer, there will be big job cuts. Furthermore, he will decide if the government workers who are now furloughed will get back their jobs and pay. There are no discussions scheduled between Trump and Schumer, but there have been talks between individual senators. They are discussing a deal over pandemic healthcare subsidies. There has been real impact on travel. At the airports, over 600 delays and more than 20 cancellations. That's just today. In the last shutdown, airport disruption was the big issue that forced a settlement. To the markets, and first up, gold. Another record, $4,062 an ounce. Is it a safe haven? Is it a currency play? We will discuss. Bitcoin retreating from its high, but it's still close to it, 122.6. That's the price of a coin, Bitcoin, that is. Stocks down Wednesday. There was concern over AI's profitability. Today, back up again. Dow up 130, NASDAQ up 23 points. Stable Treasury yields, I call it that, 4.11 on the 10-year. 2-year Treasury yielding 3.56%. Now to this story on the left-hand side of your screen. DHS Secretary goes to Portland, the epicenter of the violent anti-ICE attacks. Kristi Noem went on the roof of the ICE building to survey the scene. She warns that the mayor of the city will have blood on his hands if anyone gets killed. And President Trump threatens to invoke the Insurrection Act to bring in federal forces if necessary. Zohan Mandami goes to extremes. He's given $28,000 to the Democratic Socialists of America. That party wants to close all ICE detention centers and give free health care to illegals. In a statement about October 7th, he accused Israel of launching genocidal war. In response, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu says Mamdani only likes Jews when they're dead. Changing times in the media business. Barry Weiss will be editor-in-chief at CBS News. Woo-hoo. You may never have heard of her, but she is pro-Israel and fiercely anti-woke. And now she's going to run the famously liberal CBS News. Watch out, you media elites. CNN may be next. Wednesday, October 8th, 2025.
And that was Varney and Company. And I just want to make a comment about all the warnings. You know, you have Donald Trump warning that there may be layoffs, and Kristi Noem warning that there's going to be blood on your hands. You don't do that. That's not power. That's weakness. It shows that you really don't want to do something. And once your opponent knows that, then they can run you all over the map, and you end up a loser. Nonprofit news now. Back in a minute.
As a dad and an economist, I found that President Donald Trump's September 10th memo calling for enforcement on pharmaceutical ad laws was a personal and professional relief. As a parent, I want to be armed with the information to make the right decisions for my family. As an economist, I want society to have guardrails against abuses by corporate entities. But abuse doesn't only happen from industry. It also happens by government officials, which is unfortunately what Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has done by seeking to ban all pharmaceutical advertising. Instead of enforcing Trump's smart guardrails, RFK is creating government censorship that violates consumer choice. He's also contradicting his own principles of patient choice and radical transparency, which Trump has championed both rhetorically and through policy. Trump's executive order to increase healthcare price transparency mandated that hospitals and insurers disclose real, not estimated, costs for care. His first-term Executive Order 13813 encouraged competition and choice in the insurance market. The order directed agencies to promote flexible health insurance options, reintroducing more affordable healthcare plans. These are the areas that warrant the administration's time and attention. As Trump's memo notes, pharma ads are already regulated. And while RFK's impulse to prohibit pharmaceutical ads undoubtedly stems, in part, from a legitimate concern about the price of healthcare costs, shifting the blame entirely onto the shoulders of advertising does not hold up to the facts. Proponents of restricting ads argue that drug makers spend far too much on marketing and not enough on research and development. But just a little digging shows pretty quickly that those numbers don't add up. In 2024, U.S. drug makers spent $10.1 billion on marketing, but these same companies accounted for 55% of the estimated $276 billion spent globally on drug research and development. The $10.1 billion spent on marketing accounted for just 1.1% of industry revenue, which totaled $880.4 billion. Also bear in mind that developing a new drug costs about $2.3 billion, which typically takes years to recoup. Clearly, the industry invests far more in innovation than in commercials. But even if pharma ads were the problem, a sweeping ban may not even be possible, as these advertisements are protected by the First Amendment's right to commercial speech, and more importantly, my freedom to get that information as a citizen and parent. It would also set a dangerous precedent that if the government thinks any industry's message is bad in some way, it could ban its ability to reach customers. The end result would be that consumers are less free and less able to make informed choices about their own health. Kennedy isn't alone in his desire to crack down on pharmaceutical ads. Earlier this summer, Socialist Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders introduced the End Prescription Drug Ads Now Act. The bill, which currently has only Democrat support, would ban any direct-to-consumer promotion of prescription drugs, whether on television, radio, print media, digital platforms, or social media. But if the Republican administration and Senate Democrats really want to make America healthy again, they need to provide the informational foundation and then trust Americans to make their own decisions. For example, give kids more recess instead of jamming them into seats all day. Avoid processed foods. Prioritize great relationships that build robust psychological and emotional health. But stop restricting consumers' freedoms. That offends me as a father who needs to make smart medical choices, and as an economist who believes a healthy society is built on empowering, not harming, consumer choice. Michael Fuse is an economic consultant by day and a political researcher by night. He holds a master's degree in economics.
All right, so that was an article from the American Thinker called Calls for Pharmaceutical Ad Restrictions Miss the Bigger Picture. The thing that Mr. Fuse, Michael Fuse, misses in this is government rights. What the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is trying to do is exercise a right that doesn't exist, a government right. And we know that because rights are preemptive. Authority is after the fact. For instance, in law enforcement, police departments have the authority to enforce the law. That means they wait until somebody's broken the law, then they go ahead and take action. They do not, however, have the right to prevent crime. That's taken care of by the individual. Individuals have rights, government has authority, and if the two come in conflict, individual rights trump government authority every time. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Alice Weidel.
Also unstrittig ist, dass die Alternative für Deutschland, das ist ja auch in unserem Programm dargelegt, dass wir für die Wiedereinführung der Wehrpflicht in unserem Land sind. Die Wehrpflicht ist zwingend notwendig für unsere Landesverteidigung. Was auch unstrittig ist, ist, dass unsere Soldaten niemals in fremde Kriegsgebiete geführt werden dürfen. Niemals. Vor allem nicht in die Ukraine. Unsere Kinder, unsere Söhne, unsere Soldaten werden niemals für die Ukraine sterben. Und darum wird sich die AfD-Fraktion auch ins Benehmen setzen mit der Partei und sich sehr viel Zeit nehmen, genau das zu diskutieren, wie das zu verhindern ist. Nämlich, was nächste Woche kommen soll mit der Wiedereinführung der Wehrpflicht der CDU und SPD. Da kann ich nur sagen, gute Nacht Deutschland. Denn unsere Jungs, unsere Söhne können dann per Beschluss von dieser Regierung, von denen niemand in irgendeiner Form ins Kriegsgebiet gehen würde. Sie kennen meine Ansicht, wenn jemand Krieg will, dann sollen sie gefälligst selbst gehen. soll ein Friedrich Merz an die Grenze gehen, in die Ukraine. Er soll selbst dienen. Oder ein Lars Klingbeil oder diese ganzen Kriegsverweigerer aus der SPD-Fraktion. Die sollen einfach mal beweisen, was sie drauf haben, wenn sie diesen Krieg fortsetzen wollen. Das möchte ich mal gerne sehen. Wir werden auf jeden Fall diesen Wehrpflichtsantrag, diesen verantwortungslosen Wehrpflichtsantrag der Chor in Bausch und Bogen ablehnen. Denn das kann man unseren Soldaten nicht antun. Wir sind unserer Landesverteidigung verpflichtet, aber nicht diesem Hauen und Stechen, diesem unverantwortlichen Hauen und Stechen und der Kriegstreiberei in der Ukraine. Dafür wird die AfD niemals zur Verfügung stehen. Und vor allen Dingen noch eins, wir werden es niemals unterstützen, dass irgendeine Regierung ohne Parlamentsbeschluss hier Soldaten entsenden kann in fremde Kriege, die uns überhaupt nichts angehen, die überhaupt gar nicht unseren nationalen Interessen entsprechen. Und darum warten wir mit Freuden und mit ganz großem Interesse den Entwurf dieser lustigen Koalition, die gar nicht mehr groß ist, sondern ganz klein, die die komplette Zustimmung der Bevölkerung bereits verloren hat. Nach 100 Tagen war Friedrich Merz so unbeliebt wie kein Kanzler vor ihm. Warten wir den Entwurf für die Wiedereinführung der Wehrpflicht dieser Bruchpilotenkoalition ab und werden darüber beraten.
And that was Alice Weidel. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, it's a little bit of motivation.
Your mindset is the reason why you're not where you're supposed to be. I need you to confront you because you're the one holding you up. I need you to confront you. I need you to look in the mirror and tell you, you are not going to do me like this no more. You're not going to continue to sabotage me. You're not. You're not going to keep procrastinating. I need you. You're not. There are those of you who are looking at that person or that thing and saying, it's messing you up. That's not the truth. You messing you up. You always want to blame other people. You want to hold other people to the fire, but you're not holding yourself to the fire. You just said you're giving 50%. You owe you an explanation. You owe you an explanation. You need to look at yourself in the mirror and say, why are you only giving 50%? What's wrong with you? Everything that you want, everything that you dream of, everything that you want to possess is phenomenal except for you. Is it that you're not where you're supposed to be because you don't have what it takes? Are you not where you're supposed to be because you don't have the opportunity? No. What it boiled down to is you not where you're supposed to be because you average. Every single thing you do is average. I'm suggesting to you that if you want to be great, that you're the first in the class and you the last one to leave. I suggest that you study every single page. You take every single note. You listen to every single thing the teacher tells you. Beast mode. You go to the training and you're listening and you're writing. Beast mode. You have to get to a place where you become comfortable with being uncomfortable. We no longer place ourselves in positions that make us feel good. Because listen here, boo, some of what you want, some of what you're trying to get ain't in the comfort zone. And so if what you want is not in the comfort zone, you got to come out of the comfort zone to get what you want. You are where you are because of your feelings. You're not on principles right now. That's not what drives you. You would be a millionaire right now if you stop going back to bed. Yeah, you got the mentor. Yeah, you got the book. So what? The books can't make you get your butt up. But what can is your principles. And I want y'all to get to the point where you are mature enough to say that even though it does not feel good, even though I don't like it, even though it's not something that I want to do, I can't keep doing what I feel because it's not going to take me where I'm trying to get to. At the end of your feelings is possibly nothing. But at the end of your principle is a promise. And some of you are where you are. If you can be real with yourself, you have gotten yourself in some mess because of your feeling. You need to take personal responsibility for your life. It's about no more excuses. It's about no more trials and tribulations not happening, but getting in your way. It's about doing whatever it takes. It's about getting up as early as you need to. And your grind has to match your dream. You can't play as much as you used to play. You can't go where you used to go. You can't do what you used to do. And now you got to push your grind up to match your dream. I need you to pick your grind up. There's nothing wrong with your dream. You have a great dream. But your grind does not affect your dream. I need you to wake up every single day, and I need you to use your 24 hours like you've never used it before. You have to find a routine and stick with it. And then when you find something good, stay with it. And if you would get to a place where you stop letting people and things take you into your feelings and take you off your game plan, you would see yourself reach success more than you've ever seen it before. You owe you to not make excuses. I live on my term. I owe myself. I owe me. I owe nobody else. There's only one person responsible for your dreams becoming reality. If you walk out of here and you don't get the job, or you don't have a job, don't you cry about it. You ask yourself, what have I not done? I will make sure I do everything in my power to make sure my mama eat. I will do everything in my power to make sure my wife ain't never got to work again. I will do whatever's in my power not to get up when you want me to get up or go to bed, not take a vacation when you want me, but take one when I want to. So I'm willing to do whatever it takes. You got the dream, but I'm willing to do what it takes. And you're not winning because you're not talented. It's that other dumb stuff you're doing while you're not winning. And you gotta let it go. You're not serious about you. And you owe you. Nobody else owe you. You owe you to bring your excellence every single day. You need to put yourself on punishment. You need to tell you no more TV, no more snacks, no more desserts, no more, no, we working out now. No more alcohol, not right now. You need to tell you that you owe you something. Every single day, if you do what you say you're going to do, you're going to get what you dream to get. Do whatever it takes. You your biggest driver.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute.
Welcome, dear soul. Right now, you've arrived at a sacred moment of healing. A moment to gently release what no longer serves you, to come home to your heart. No judgment, no shame. Only love, only freedom. Let's begin with your breath. Take a slow, deep inhale through your nose and gently exhale out of your mouth. Feel your body relax. Feel your heart open just a little more. Now, gently bring to mind someone, something, or some part of yourself that needs healing. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to understand it. Just hold it gently in your awareness. And now, we speak the sacred words of Ho'oponopono. I'm sorry for anything I've done, knowingly or unknowingly, to create this pain. Please forgive me for my part in this, for the things I could not see, for what I didn't know. Thank you for this opportunity to heal, for this moment of awareness, for this chance to choose again. I love you, because love is the medicine that brings everything back into wholeness. And I love you just as you are. Repeat gently in your mind or out loud with me. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. One more time. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Feel the energy around you softening. Feel the weight lifting. This is forgiveness. This is peace. This is you coming home to yourself. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your heart. See you in the next meditation.
And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now Europe 1.
Si vous deviez ce matin vous adresser directement à Emmanuel Macron, que lui diriez-vous?
Je lui dirais ceci sans acrimonie, mais les yeux dans les yeux. Vous ne regardez pas les Français. Vous regardez ailleurs. Vous préférez le Luxembourg à Rocamadour. Vous préférez Davos à Vesoul. T'as voulu voir Vesoul et on a vu Davos. Et en fait, vous ne savez pas qu'il y a des Français, j'en ai vu hier après-midi, 2, un qui m'a dit « je me soigne plus ». J'ai plus les moyens. Pendant que les étrangers clandestins, eux, se sont soignés gratuitement, avec notre argent. Et un autre qui m'a dit « je saute un repas sur 2 ». Un repas, c'est un père de famille. Donc vous ne voyez pas cela. Vous ne comprenez pas la France.
Il ne comprend pas la France et les Français?
Alors, ça va plus loin. Vous cherchez à faire une post-France. La France de l'ubérisation. Je m'explique. En fait, vous voulez faire venir une nouvelle population pour faire un système multiculturel. Ça vous amuse. Vous voulez faire de la France le laboratoire planétaire du paradis diversitaire. C'est ça votre projet. On vous a vu venir, on vous voit venir. Et donc...
And that was Europe 1. Back in a minute. Now, Giorgia Meloni.
Non sono stata particolarmente dura nei confronti dello sciopero, ho detto quello che penso, come sempre, insomma che lo sciopero generale era pretestuoso. Ma guardi, basta guardare un po' indietro. Nei 10 anni in cui la sinistra era al governo, la CGIL ha indetto in 10 anni 6 scioperi generali. Nei 3 anni in cui noi siamo al governo ha indetto 4 scioperi generali e lo fa mentre aumentano i dati dell'occupazione, aumentano i salari, diminuisce la precarietà e infatti fanno lo sciopero generale su una materia di politica estera che è un'altra, sostanzialmente un altro unicum nella storia del sindacato. Quindi io penso banalmente che sia appunto pretestuoso e penso che la CGIL sembri molto più interessata a difendere la sinistra piuttosto che a difendere i lavoratori.
And that was Giorgia Meloni. Back in a minute.
Thank you. And now, Jerry Wayne. There's two trees in our backyard. They ain't alike, but they don't need to be to thrive. One's an oak, broad, leaning away. And the other, a cedar, straight back, ancient with majesty. I am the oak. Set back just so, the way a man leans when he's watching something that humbles him. Something too grand to claim, but too close to turn away from. And she is the cedar, tall and shaken, full of grace. The kind of tree that holds the sky up with its shoulders. They grow side by side. They might fuss for the sun now and then, branches tangling like words spoken in heat, but the storms teach them patience. The storms drive their roots deeper, like hands clasped in the dark. What began as two is one now. You can see it if you know where to look. Every time I set eyes on them, I think about my Rachel, how we've stood the same way, how we bent in high winds but never broke, how we found enough sun to share and bloomed in the little seasons of peace. It's a foolish thing, maybe, for a man to sit on his porch and see his life mirrored in the language of the trees, but trees must have stories too, and I imagine if you listen close, they might tell yours back to you.
And that was Jerry Wayne. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Apollo.
2. Reflecting on it years later, Mike Collins wondered whether the most historic moment in the Apollo program might have occurred not on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first men on the moon, but at 9:41 a.m. Central Standard Time, December 21st, 1968. On that morning, Collins was Capcom. If it hadn't been for a bone spur requiring surgery the preceding July, Collins would have been up there himself. He had been a crew member on Apollo 8 until the surgery had made him lose too much training time. Collins had been reassigned to a later mission, Apollo 11. Now they were 2 hours and 50 minutes into the flight of Apollo 8, carrying Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders. So far, George Lowe's imaginative leap had been vindicated. There had been no pogo during launch, no premature engine shutdowns, no problems with the slaw. The spacecraft had been checked out in orbit, and its attitude had been meticulously aligned and double-checked for the next step, the procedure known as translunar injection. As Capcom, it fell to Collins to pass up the word. "Apollo 8, Collins said into his headset, "you are go for TLI." From the spacecraft, Jim Lovell answered, "Roger, understand, we are go for TLI." Collins, a man with a sense of both poetry and history, felt even as he spoke that the words weren't enough. Here is one of the most historic things we've ever done, may ever do, he thought to himself, and there ought to be some recognition of it. And what do I say? Apollo 8, you're go for TLI. But in the Moker, that's the way you said, mankind, the time has come to leave your first home. The S-4B relit as programmed, firing for 5 minutes. It increased the spacecraft's speed from 25,000 to 33,500 feet per second, sufficient to take the spacecraft out of Earth's gravitational field. The flight to the moon was outwardly serene. During the third night of the translunar coast, the boys in the trench entertained themselves by calculating the precise moment when the spacecraft would reach the equigravisphere, the balance point between the gravitational fields of Earth and Moon. When the spacecraft reached that invisible point in space at 2:29 p.m. Central Standard Time, December 23rd, they called up hard copies of their displays for mementos. But other than that, all seemed quiet. The course was good, and the television newscast told that all was well until the next big event, insertion into a lunar orbit. Elsewhere in the control center, however, there was a degree of concern. The first night out, Capcom had received a cryptic message from the crew of Apollo 8 to listen to the dump of the onboard crew conversations. Periodically, the data recorded on board, including the crew's conversation, were transmitted, dumped, back to Earth. Charlesworth didn't get to it right away. A while later, the crew repeated its suggestion, and so Charlesworth went to a back room and listened to the playback. The message the crew had recorded on the onboard tapes, so that it couldn't be monitored by the world at large, was that the commander of the mission had a medical problem, vomiting and diarrhea. Because Borman didn't seem a likely candidate for space sickness, He had never been ill on his 14-day Gemini mission. One of the first explanations that occurred to Charlesworth and medical director Charles Berry was that Borman's illness had something to do with the radiation belts Apollo 8 had traversed as it headed outward toward the moon. Much of the next day was spent playing through the implications if either of the other crew members were to come down with the same symptoms, and rethinking the abort rules for medical problems. But Borman recovered, and the crisis passed. By that time, however, the design engineers were getting fidgety about the status of the Service Propulsion System, the SPS, the engine that had to work to take the spacecraft into and out of lunar orbit. Just 2 days before launch, engineers doing ground tests on the SPS engine had brought Aaron Cohen a disturbing piece of news. The SPS engine had 2 legs or roots for feeding propellant into the combustion chamber. Either alone would be adequate to do the job, but mission rules demanded that both be functional before the flight director committed the crew to lunar orbit. The problem was that tests showed a high spike, a potential detonation, if they initiated both legs without first wetting the combustion chamber. Wetting, which was not difficult, consisted of firing the engine for a brief period, but no one had been asked to incorporate the kind of wetting they needed, using each leg separately, into the flight plan, nor had any provision been made for firing the SPS en route to the moon if the firing wasn't needed for a course correction. They would have to be ready to fire the engine, a burn, twice, using each leg separately, and to arrange the 2 burns so that they canceled each other out. Such a requirement should have been planned and incorporated into the flight plan and the mission software weeks earlier, and Aaron Cohen had a few tense minutes when he told George Lowe about it. In fact, recalled Cohen, the usually calm and measured Lowe chewed me out something royal. Still, there was nothing else to do but incorporate the 2 corrections into the flight plan, and so at the last minute they did. When they did perform the 2 burns, they got a jolt when the data revealed that the engine had not performed up to expectations. The degree of acceleration, known in the control center as delta V, was a little short. Delta for change, V for velocity. Teams at Rockwell and Houston spent a pretty active 3 days, as Charlesworth put it, while Apollo 8 was on its way to the moon, assuring themselves that it was a minor problem. Helium bubbles that had been loaded with the propellants were causing the engine to miss during very short burns. Ed Pavelka was sitting at the FIDO console when the time came to pass up the data for the burn that would put Apollo 8 into lunar orbit. This was done by voice. Pavelka provided the numbers to Capcom. Capcom read them to the crew, and then the crew read them back to the ground to verify. Pavelka had done it many times before during simulations, but he had a funny feeling about giving out the numbers for real. It was, he decided, a sobering feeling. It was a time for getting nervous about things they knew they shouldn't be nervous about. Hitting the moon, for example. The people in MPAD had calculated the trajectories to fractions of degrees, and independent computer programs were constantly checking their answers. The algorithms themselves had been tested and retested. I know we have figured this right, Charlesworth kept telling himself, and I know all our guidance systems are accurate and we tracked it properly, and all the mathematicians in the world have looked at this thing. Still, 60 miles was, in Charlesworth's mind, pretty close when you scaled 60 miles to the diameter of the moon. And Charlesworth, who was off duty for that shift, continued to pace nervously in the back row of the mocher. John Mayer, director of MPAD, was in a back room that night. MPAD staff supported the consoles in the trench, and he found himself the center of attention. Suddenly, Miller and Gilruth and Kraft came walking into the room saying, "How sure are you we're going to miss the moon?" Mayer remembered. "I'm real sure," he answered, laughing. Emil Schieser, one of Mayer's young navigational whizzes, couldn't figure out why people were so edgy. Shoot, we had been to the moon with unmanned spacecraft on a number of occasions, had flown the lunar orbiter, and they were worried about us hitting the moon, Schieser said. They never once asked us how we were going to not burn them up when we came back, and nobody had ever come back from the moon before. I thought that was funny. Why were they so concerned about us smattering them all over the moon and not worried about us burning them up? Schieser was referring to one of the most delicate phases of the mission, the entry back into the Earth's atmosphere, which would occur at an unprecedented speed of 25,000 miles per hour. and which required the navigational system to bring the spacecraft into a narrow 10-mile-wide corridor. But somehow the entry was familiar, at least psychologically. The flight controllers had brought lots of astronauts back to Earth before, ever since they had sweated out John Glenn's landing from orbit during Mercury. Entry was known terrain, whatever the new complexities, whereas consigning a crew to lunar orbit was not. Mayer could understand why it seemed tricky to a layman. It was comparable to taking a rifle outside his office in Building 30, he would acknowledge, and aiming it at a basketball in downtown Houston, some 26 miles away. Actually, it was even tougher than that, more like aiming at a point that was 1/16 of an inch to the side of the basketball. So yes, Mayer could see why a layman might think it was tricky. Pavelka, who was not a layman, decided it was legitimate to be nervous. We had simulated the hell out of the stuff, but there was never proof that it all really fit together, you know. It was not quite 4 a.m. on December 24th, 1968. In the viewing room, 100 people were packed into a space meant for 74. One of them was Robert Sherrod, a well-known journalist who had been covering the space program after a colorful career as a war and foreign correspondent that had begun before World War II. I looked up at the big center screen beyond the banks of flight controllers' consoles, he wrote later. Suddenly, the familiar map of the Earth vanished from the big plastic screen, and in its stead, a map of the moon appeared. The effect was overwhelming. I can recall a few similar heart-stoppers in a lifetime of looking and listening. The view of Angkor Wat's timeless brooding temples by moonlight. Hearing Giulietta Simeonato leading the anvil chorus at the Met. Seeing for the first time the coast of Asia from a bomber after more than 3 years and many blood-drenched battles across the wide Pacific. None of these equaled the shock of seeing that illuminated map on the screen. A lighted sign above the viewing room's glass partition began flashing, "Quiet, please." Through the intercom, they could hear Capcom Jerry Carr say, "Apollo 8, you are riding the best bird we can find." Jim Lovell replied, "Thanks a lot, troops. We'll see you on the other side." Dick Coos, watching with a crowd of other sim soups through the window of the sim room, was as nervous as an expectant father. Up until then, it had been fun. He had been brought in on the secret early so that he could plan the sims. If anybody had known they were preparing sims of lunar orbit insertion, the word about C' would have gotten out. So they had worked without telling even their own supervisors. Then, after Sherrod's flight, when the secret had come out into the open, there had been the big push. Again and again, they had run sims of translunar insertion, lunar orbit insertion, and trans-Earth insertion. The fall had turned to winter, and the days had gotten shorter. Once an entire week had gone by when Coos, driving to work before dawn, running sims all day, never so much as stepping outside the windowless control center, driving home after nightfall, had not seen the sun. Now, as Apollo 8 disappeared behind the moon and its radio signal fell silent, Dick Coos felt lightheaded. He wondered vaguely whether he was going to faint. Jerry Bostick was retro. As director of the Flight Dynamics branch, Bostick wouldn't ordinarily have been sitting at that position, since retro was not the senior console in the trench. But Chris Kraft had asked Bostick to do it. Retro handled abort modes, and if the spacecraft reappeared on the other side of the moon after anything except a nominal burn, Kraft wanted Bostick sitting at the retro console. For Bostick, the moment when the spacecraft went behind the moon was depressing. Controllers had something of the mother hen in them, and now they were helpless. There weren't any data to watch, nothing at all they could do to help the astronauts if something went wrong. Bostick didn't reason all this through, he just felt a sense of loss. Bostick was still brooding when he heard Flight Director Glenn Lunny say, "Okay, everybody, this is a good time to take a break. Everybody back by 69:20. Bostick's first reaction was that, on the contrary, this was a hell of a strange time to be taking a break. But by that time, Lunny already had his headset off and was walking down the middle aisle in the mocher. He stopped and put his hand on Bostick's shoulder. "How's it going, Retro?" he asked, smiling at the notion of Bostick working the retro console again, just like the old days. It finally came to Bostick that it was no good being a mother hen just then, that there wasn't a damn thing to be done anyway. So he followed Lunny out the door and got in line for the restroom. There was no shortage of people to cover the consoles while the black team was gone. It seemed to Bostic as if every flight controller in FOD had congregated in the Mocher for this moment. No one lingered. Within a few minutes, all the controllers were back, watching the digital clocks on the front wall to time the exact moment of the spacecraft's reappearance around the edge of the moon. Bostic had set up 2 clocks. One counted down to the time when radio contact would resume if there had been no engine burn behind the moon, and the spacecraft was on its way back to Earth on a free return trajectory. The other was based on time to acquisition for a nominal burn that would put 8 into the planned lunar orbit. The moment when the spacecraft would have re-emerged if there had been no burn came and went, and then it became a waiting game. Some sort of burn had occurred, but what kind remained to be seen. Bostic had never seen the room so still. It was jammed with controllers, and yet there wasn't a sound. Lunny stood behind his console, apparently unperturbed. The numbers on Telcom's console revealed that they had acquired the radio signal before the crew actually said anything. The timing was to within a second of the predicted time for acquisition after a nominal burn. To Bostic, the exactitude of it was like a religious experience. God, Bostic decided, had a lot on the ball. The silence in the Mocher was broken as the controllers resumed murmuring into their headsets, and Capcom talked to the crew. On Christmas Eve, in lunar orbit, Frank Borman read a prayer for the congregation at St. Christopher's Episcopal Church back in Houston. Later, on their television broadcast, the 3 crew members took turns reading from Genesis. It came as a surprise to the controllers in the Mocher, as it did to the millions watching on television, and it was just as overpowering to the controllers as to the rest of the world. This magnificent poetry about the creation of the earth, read by the first men to see the earth whole. Frank Borman, the commander of Apollo 8, had the last verses. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Borman paused, then concluded. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with, good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth. Rod Lowe, sitting at his ECOM console, working his last special flight as a controller, just as Arnie Aldrich had promised he could, found his eyes welling over with tears. He bent over his flight log, embarrassed, hoping that no one would notice. Religion and the Christmas season were on many people's minds during the flight. In its pre-flight coverage, Time magazine drew a comparison between the journey of Apollo 8 and the Stations of the Cross. There were 5 key phases for the flight: launch to orbit, trans-lunar injection, lunar orbit insertion, trans-Earth injection, and entry. During the first 3, there had been a way to abort and go home. It was the 4th, TEI, trans-Earth injection, that had worried people since August. This was the moment that some said had caused Webb to leave NASA. It was quite simple. The SPS engine had to work, bringing the crew out of lunar orbit, or else the crew would circle the moon with a nice clear radio link back to Earth for about 9 days until their oxygen was exhausted and they died. For people watching around the world, this was the moment of the most awful fascination with the flight of Apollo 8. The possibility of the astronauts being marooned preyed on everyone's mind, including the minds of people close to the situation. A few days before the flight, a senior official in Miller's office, still uneasy about the decision to go into lunar orbit, was heard to ask, "Just how do we tell Susan Borman that Frank is stranded in orbit around the moon?" The new NASA administrator, Tom Paine, a no-nonsense type, heard of this remark after the flight and responded, "I guess I would have sat down, held her hand, and said, 'Susan, Frank is stranded in orbit around the moon.'" But it was still the stuff of nightmares, and the SPS engine had accordingly been the object of morbid scrutiny by the media. Diagrams of the engine were shown in popular magazines. Reporters breathlessly described the meticulous checkout that the engine was receiving. This, they emphasized, was the one system that had no redundancy. There was only one SPS engine, no backup. If the SPS failed when a spacecraft was in Earth orbit, the crew could use the small jets in the reaction and control system to slow the spacecraft enough to deorbit. In lunar orbit, the same small jets did not have nearly enough power to speed the spacecraft out of lunar gravity into an Earth-bound trajectory. Within NASA, confidence in the SPS was high. This is not to say that we didn't recognize there was a degree of risk in doing C prime, said Rod Rose, one of Kraft's deputies. In fact, I guess one of our basic homilies that we drilled into everybody at every conceivable opportunity was, look, fellows, when you light up the S4B for the second time, for TLI, you're going to be 3 days away from home, and don't anybody ever forget it. You've got to have that much more confidence in your systems. Especially, they had to have a lot of faith that the SPS would fire when the time came to head back. But they had reason for faith. We had 3 eminently successful flights as far as the SPS was concerned. We had burned the thing under all manner of conditions, some of which it was never really designed to do. Marty Schofiletti, the Rockwell engineer who had helped disassemble spacecraft 012 after the fire, was by this time conducting the checkout of the SPS at the Cape. He thought that the obsession with the SPS as a one-shot, non-redundant system was a lot of hype. When they say no redundancy, that's a misnomer, he said later. There was only one engine bell, of course, and only one combustion chamber, but all the avionics that fed the signals to that engine and all the mechanical components that had to work, like the little valves that had to be pressurized to open the ball valves and so forth, were at least single-fault tolerant and usually two-fault tolerant. There were a heck of a lot of ways to start that engine. And of course, they had indeed checked it out carefully before the flight, but nothing they didn't do for any other mission. All this was still correct as of Christmas Eve 1968, and yet it ultimately didn't make any difference to the way many of the people in Apollo felt. Cadwell Johnson, speaking as a designer of the spacecraft, explained it. He knew about the checks and balances and all the other people working on the design who were bound to catch a major error. But still, he said, after a while you really become appalled that you've gotten yourself involved in the thing. At first, it's an academic exercise, and then the first thing you know, there's people building these things, and they are really getting ready to do it, and you start thinking, have I made a real bad judgment somewhere and the damn thing is just not going to work at all? Marty Schofiletti, despite knowing all the ways that the SPS was supposed to be foolproof, concurred. For him, as for the most unsophisticated citizen watching on TV, it was darn scary. As the spacecraft disappeared behind the moon on its last revolution, the one when it would fire the SPS to free itself of lunar gravity, the Mocher once again filled with off-shift controllers. Once again the room fell silent. Chris Kraft later reported that waiting to reacquire the signal was his most apprehensive moment since he had joined the space program, worse even than Glenn's entry after the heat shield problem. Fido J. Green reported the news. Flight, we have USB, upper sideband, data. Initial residuals look good. Then came the first words from the crew. Please be informed, astronaut Jim Lovell intoned across the 240,000 miles. There is a Santa Claus. In the Fido flight log, Green wrote in small, neat writing, burn status, burn time 3 + 23, ignition on time, attitude nominal, Vx minus 0.5, Vy plus 0.4, Vz 0. And below that, in big, sloppy, joyous script, we is coming home. For many of the people in the Apollo program, Apollo 8 was the most magical flight of all, surpassing even the first landing of Apollo 11. For some, like Mike Collins, 8's momentous historic significance was foremost. For John Aaron and ECOM, it was simpler than that. When you're 25 and caught up in the thing and the Mocher's the only environment you know, you don't tend to view things that way. For Aaron, it was the sheer excitement of going to the moon for the first time. Or as Fido J. Green put it, Apollo 8 was the time that they stopped just running around in circles. Apollo 8 went someplace. Around the world, people looked at the moon with a special wonder. So did the controllers. In Jay Green's case, it occupied most of the rest of the night. He went home and took a bottle of scotch and some ice and went out beside the pool in his apartment complex and lay back on a lounge chair for hours, all by himself, getting happily drunk and watching the moon. Dick Coos wanted to do something like that, but he couldn't. On Christmas Eve, after the reading from Genesis, Dick Coos didn't get back home from the control center until 3 a.m. When he did, he had to hurry to put together his 5-year-old daughter's Christmas present, a bicycle. Just as he finished, he heard a little girl's voice say, "Santa Claus has been here." He never did get any sleep that Christmas. The people of MSC always waited until after splashdown and recovery were safely over to hold the parties, and so it wasn't until the afternoon of December 27th that NASA 1 Boulevard exploded in a no-holds-barred movable feast that went on through the night. John Aaron and Rod Lowe went to the flintlock, along with the singing wheel, one of the controller's favorite watering holes. They were taking a break, standing in the downstairs entrance as people streamed up the stairs to join the mob on the second floor when a friend passed by. What was Rod doing down here? Why wasn't he upstairs partying? There were only 4 days left in that sad and chaotic year of 1968. Things hadn't gotten any better after April 4th. Since then, Robert Kennedy had been shot and killed. The nation's cities had been torn by riots and burnings, and unprecedented bitterness over the Vietnam War divided Americans from one another. Still, at that moment, all Lowe could think of to say was, "I'm just standing here being very proud to be an American."
And that was, let's see here, it was Chapter 23, Section 2 from Apollo, Charles Murray and Catherine Bly Cox. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that abortion is power for men.